Okay, so we've got a pretty interesting story here, one that really kind of hits home the importance of cybersecurity, even when we're talking about things we use every day, like printers.
Right.
We got this article sent to us, and it's about some vulnerabilities, some pretty serious ones, in something called CUPS, which is a printing system. It's in a lot of Linux systems.
Yeah.
And honestly, it reads like something out of a movie plot.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It's got that like hacker thriller element to it.
Yes.
But the thing is, this is very real, and it's a big deal because essentially what we're looking at is a chain of vulnerabilities that could give someone remote access to your entire system, not just, mess with your printer queue.
Yeah, see, that's what really caught my eye too, right? It's like, okay, a printer vulnerability, how bad could that be? But the article really drives home that this could be a gateway to a
Absolutely.
much, much larger security breach.
Mm.
And they use this term remote code execution,
Right.
which sounds ominous,
It
right?
does.
So can you break that down for us a little bit? What does that actually mean, and why is that so concerning?
Yeah, so remote code execution, at its most basic, just means that somebody can remotely put code onto your system, your computer system, and make it run, right? So that's really what it is. It's almost like, if you think about it, like, you've got your front door and you're really worried about the front door, but someone's got a backdoor key and they can just slip in while you're not looking.
Right.
That's kind of what this is. This
Yeah.
vulnerability in CUPS is that backdoor key, right?
Right.
And so they slip in, and then they can inject like malicious code, and once they're in, all bets are off, right? They can really wreak some havoc.
Yeah, and we're not talking about just like changing the font on your print job or something. This is serious stuff.
No.
We're talking about potentially giving attackers the ability to steal sensitive data, install malware, maybe even take control of the whole system.
Yeah. I mean, they can do a lot. And, what makes this even more dangerous is this is not just one thing.
Right.
It's not just one flaw. It's a series of vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
And they kind of all work together.
They're chained together.
Yeah, to create this opening. So, the article actually names 4 different vulnerabilities. CVE 2024-47176, CVE 2024-47076, CVE 2024-47175, and CVE 2024-47177. And so, it's not like you just patch one thing and it's done. It's like all of these need to be addressed.
So it's not just one hole you're plugging, you got to get them all.
You got to get them all.
Yeah.
Imagine like links in a chain, right? If you've got, one link that's weak, the whole thing can snap.
Right.
And so the article uses this example. Instead of, just printing your document, imagine your printer being tricked into downloading some malware and then running it
Oh, wow.
because of these vulnerabilities.
Okay, so that image really kind of drives it home that this is some serious stuff.
It is.
But how worried should the average person be?
I think if I heard all that, I'd be a little freaked out, honestly.
Like, is my home printer about to, like, launch a cyber attack on my bank account? So let's talk about who's really at risk here, because the article, it seems to be mainly focused on Linux systems.
Right.
And that's not, your average person's computer. So does that mean that most people listening can kind of breathe a sigh of relief?
I mean, it's a good question. And, while these vulnerabilities are definitely concerning, it's not, I wouldn't say it's like, everybody panic kind of situation.
Right.
Doom and gloom for everyone with a printer.
Yeah.
Yes, COPS is used a lot in Linux, which, powers a lot of servers, a lot of back-end systems.
Right.
But your typical home computer user, someone on like, Windows or a Mac, they're probably going to be okay.
So it's not as simple as, like, any computer with a printer is now vulnerable?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. And actually, the article even mentions that like a lot of default configurations of CUPS, they're not even vulnerable in the first place. And then there's also this other thing, like for this whole exploit to even work, this UDP port 631 has to be accessible.
Okay, yeah, that does ring a bell, but remind us what that means and why is that so important?
So basically, your computer uses different ports for communication.
Right.
And they're each like for different types of data.
Right.
So 631, that's like a dedicated line, but it's specifically for printing. So if it's not open, if it's not accessible, it's kind of like that phone line is disconnected.
So even if someone was trying to exploit this, if that port's not open, they can't get in.
Exactly. It's like trying to, deliver a package to a house with no address.
Yeah.
And the article really emphasizes that for most home setups, that port is not going to be just open by default.
Right.
It's more of like a server thing or like, a network. that's more complicated.
Okay.
They actually quote Rapid7 in the article, which is a cybersecurity firm, and they say, and I quote, "Systems are only really exploitable from the public internet or across network segments if UDP port 631 is accessible."
Right. Okay, so that makes sense. So it seems like, yes, these vulnerabilities are serious,
Hmm.
but for the average home user, the risk is, well, not non-existent, it's lower. It's more about, it sounds like, good network security practices, especially for businesses and organizations, but for the average Joe, like, maybe don't panic just yet. So we've gone from like, wait, my printer can be hacked, to, okay, here are the specifics, here's who's really at risk. But there's this other layer to the article that I found really interesting, and it's how cybersecurity experts are reacting to this. There's a whole spectrum of opinions here.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see, right? You've got the technical details on one hand, and then you've got the, what does this all mean?
Right.
And
Exactly.
how people interpret that, because that really shapes how people are going to react to it.
Yeah, and we see some people saying this is like, potential doomsday for some Linux systems, and others are like, hold on, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So as, people trying to make sense of this, what do we do with that? What are we supposed to take away from those different opinions?
Well, it just shows you that even in cybersecurity, you got to think for yourself, right?
Yeah.
Critical thinking is key. Yeah, these vulnerabilities are serious, no doubt. And if you're running a system that's exposed, yeah, you need to take action, like yesterday. But we also don't want to go into panic mode. I mean, there's a quote from Benjamin Harris, the CEO of Watchtower, in the article, and he says, "It looks like the embargoed Linux unoff RCE vulnerabilities that have been touted as doomsday for Linux systems may only affect a subset of systems." Right? So
Yeah.
what he's saying is, yeah, your average desktop, your workstation, the chances of it being both vulnerable and exposed in just the right way, it's not as likely.
So it's all about
It's
context.
exact.
It's like saying, hey, a hurricane's dangerous. Well, yeah, but if you live in Kansas, you're probably going to be okay.
Right.
Exactly.
Doesn't mean the hurricane's not a big deal, but, you have to assess your own risk, right?
Right.
And that's where I think the practical advice comes in.
Right.
And the article does mention a few things that people can do to, be safer, even if they don't fully understand all the technical stuff.
Right. And they mentioned like disabling something called cups browsed if you don't need it.
Right.
And of course, that UDP port 631 keeps coming up. So for those of us who maybe aren't Linux experts, can you just remind us, like, what's the big deal with those two things?
Yeah, so Cups Browsed, it's a service that helps in some environments, but a lot of home users, they don't even need it.
Okay.
So if you don't need it, get rid of it. Why have that potential door open, right?
Right. Less is more in that case.
Less is more, exactly. And then, yeah, that UDP port 631, like we said, controlling access to that, even if you're not running a server or anything, it's good practice to know, like, what ports are open on your network, what's talking to what.
Good security hygiene.
Exactly. It's like locking your doors,
Yeah.
even if you live in a safe neighborhood.
It's the little things, right? But this whole thing kind of brings up a bigger point, too, which the article touches on, and that's this, cybersecurity is not a one-and-done kind of deal.
No.
It feels like we're always finding new vulnerabilities, patching them, then there's a new
It's a
one.
game of whack-a-mole, right?
It really is. Yeah, so how do we even keep up?
Well, I think that's why it's so important to not just react, right? I mean, this whole CUPS thing, it reminded me of, other vulnerabilities that have come up, like Log4Shell, Heartbleed. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
Big deals.
Right.
And they were. But there's a point that Satnam Narang, he's from Tenable, he makes in the article that, we can't be in a constant state of panic about every single vulnerability that pops up.
Right.
We have to, prioritize, focus on the ones that are actively being exploited, that are known. Those are the ones that are the most dangerous, right?
Right. Pick your battles.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's about understanding the landscape.
Right. Keeping your ear to the ground, kind of knowing what's out there. What's the bigger threat?
Absolutely. And not letting fear completely take over.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's not helpful either.
So stay informed, be proactive, but don't panic.
Exactly.
Well, this has been, I think, a really fascinating look at, not just these specific vulnerabilities, but just this whole world of cybersecurity and honestly, how even the things we don't think about every day can have these, hidden vulnerabilities.
Absolutely. I think if anything, that's the biggest takeaway, right?
Yeah.
It's like, just because you don't understand how something works doesn't mean it can't be used against you. So, be curious, keep learning. That's our best defense.
I love that. Be curious, keep learning. Great advice. Well, thank you so much for for diving into this with us. This was a lot to unpack, but I think we covered a lot of ground.
I did.
And for our listeners, remember the article focused on these specific vulnerabilities patches are being developed, but also made me think, how fast are those patches coming out, right? And how does that play into the bigger picture of security? So something to think about as we navigate this crazy world of technology.